Good evening, everyone. Haiwa ilta paiwa buna ziwa. A very good morning.
Bună ziua.
And it's a cold, foggy evening in Sonipat, Haryana, India. Greetings to all of you who've joined. Thank you very much for joining. This session, as you know, is on greening environmental law, role of environmental law, and rise of the environmental consciousness in and around the world, especially within the law students, the legal fraternity. So I'll start with a few things which generally come to my mind when I'm in my class, and whether it's Wordsworth's daffodils or Frost's lovely dark and deep woods, Bond's cherry tree or Blake's tiger, or indeed Rudyard Kipling's jungle, it will not be trite to say that environment and nature have played such an important part, and they keep on playing this important and significant part within our digital and COVID-infected and globally shared lives. However much is the talk of environmental and climate change issues amongst the diverse fora, one cannot also deny that in the last century, with the scientific growth and development and the capitalist economic ideology, we have extracted resources in much unsustainable ways. We have taken for granted the limitations of planetary resources, and these, of course, have been posing a threat of linear extinction for the biodiversity, raising so many problems of environmental harm, harm to the planet. Along with that, globalization and development have in the last century also cast a burdensome toll. The loss of biodiversity, the imbalance in the ecosystems, climate change, erratic weather patterns have extolled its cost, a disproportionate cost on the human environment very, very dearly. The recent findings, as all of us are aware, of the UNEP, the IPCC, and the recent COP26 deliberations reiterate over and over a truly devastating picture, but there is this wake-up call, a call for action. And the choice has never been clearer. It demands the raising of environmental consciousness, application of nature-based solutions, or be it better governance policies and laws, recognition of the most vulnerable communities as the first respondents, and crafting, I think, of a duty-based normative global framework as our last chance to remedy the wrongs towards making our planet Earth better. It, of course, need not be emphasized or re-emphasized that this degraded environment has led to devastating results, which we are seeing in the form of displacement of refugees, island nations submerging, the energy crisis that we are facing, water scarcity, displacement within the states, environmental insecurities, and related threats. So it's absolutely unequivocally clear that we must put our heads together. We need to come up with sustainable solutions within the dominant ideology, and also take into account the cognitive dissonance and recognize the diversity of beliefs and opinions. And we need to work upon environmental and natural resource governance and management within three rubrics: the urban, the rural, and the wilderness sectors. If one is looking at global studies, as we have in the yesterday and through the sessions that we have had today, for formation of curricular formation or formulation amongst law schools, especially law students, the reading of environmental law in its various facets, interdisciplinarity, comparative, global, it becomes naturally mandatory. So given the phenomenon of globalization, modernism, postmodernity, the empirical evidence that we have keeps on mounting that natural limits to growth are being overstepped. There has been an increase in this environmental arena, and various kinds of research, whether it is legal hermeneutical research, environmental epistemological research, socio-legal, socio-political, quantitative and qualitative, all such research, the methodologies might have informed the environmental discourse within both developed and developing countries, but much has to be done. It has also led to a search for answers, I suppose, of a different kind, including the emergent ethics based on ecocentric approach and what I said as a global duty-based ethics. So an argument which comes naturally for academics, for legal policymakers, is to make sure that lawyers that we train are equipped with the knowledge, with the methodology, with normative as well as the normative and the theoretical basis, and they are well sensitized to the challenges that we face vis-a-vis the environment. So how we train our lawyers, how we talk to the students, how we develop this global environmental law curricula, probably amongst us within the law schools across nations, we need to answer these questions and address the legal analysis probably maybe on that basis. So what sort of knowledge will these, will the environmental epistemological study possess, whether the students would take care of not thinking within compartments, within fragmented areas of law, but probably that when we are studying environmental law, as yesterday, Justice Governor Beasley was talking about, and Justice Geeta Mittal was talking about, they did emphasize comparative environmental law or comparative law studies. So that also becomes important within the legal analytical context. So today we bring forth experts from around the world to look at this specific shifting, fragmented world, which is somewhere it has found some common thread under the rubric of global global legal studies, especially in respect of the environment. And one of the many things that we would like to discuss is how is it that lawyers, as lawyers, and the lawyers that we educate can contribute to a more sustainable future. And it is my pleasure then to introduce to you the expert panel. And just before that, I would just like to also talk about one quote which comes to mind, that it is, while we are doing this and while we are discussing it, it is more than a question of teaching techniques to the lawyers, teaching economic concepts to the lawyers or the students, but we need to teach them or make them more conversant with the reality of life, as well as the concept wherein we keep on having so many debates on justice, especially environmental justice, the sustainability within the ecosystems, and reimagination of working with the community. As I said, the communities which are vulnerable, the first respondents. So probably a holistic sense of dealing with environmental law should be emphasized, probably. This is my opinion. And so this distinguished panel, therefore, is going to probably discuss the shift in the epistemic lens within this framework. And welcome once again. So let me introduce the speakers. I will start from Professor Timo Koivurova. Professor Koivurova is a research professor at the Arctic Center of the University of Lapland. He has also worked as the director of the Northern Institute of Environmental and Minority Law at Arctic Center since 2004. And he is also part of the Arctic Center, and he's been there until 2020. Professor Koivurova is a member at the Social, Economic and Cultural Expert Group of the Sustainable Development Working Group of the Arctic Council. He's also a docent of international law at the Faculty of Law, Economics and Business Administration at the University of Eastern Finland and at the Faculty of Law at the University of Turku. He specializes in various aspects of international law applicable in the Arctic and the Antarctic region, and his research work addresses the interplay between different levels of environmental law, legal status of indigenous peoples, law of the sea in the Arctic waters, integrated maritime policy of the EU, role of law in mitigating and adapting to climate change. Professor Koivurova is also a board member in the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. Welcome. Next on the panel is Professor Christiana Ochoa. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Christiana. Professor Ochoa.
Ochoa.
Ochoa, is it?
Ochoa.
Ochoa. I'm sorry. My apologies. Professor Ochoa has been recognized for her research, teaching, and service, and has held numerous administrative positions at the law school, campus, and at the university level. In 2018, she was named as an Indiana University class of 1950 Herman B. Wells Endowed Professor. Her research seeks to understand how economic activity impacts human and ecological well-being. Her theoretical and empirical research relies on international and comparative law, particularly in the fields of business and human rights, law and development, international finance, and FDIs, or the foreign direct investment. She brings her field of work as well as her practice experience at the global law firm Clifford Chance, and with a number of human rights and humanitarian NGOs in Latin America, to her research questions and her classroom teaching. Her scholarship in these areas has been variously published in a number of leading journals such as Yale, Harvard, Michigan, Duke's. Her work's also been published internationally, including in Germany, Colombia, and Korea. Apart from being such an eminent academician, she's also an accomplished film director and executive producer. And her first documentary, Otra Cosa No Hay, There's Nothing Else, was completed in 2014, and she received critical acclaim for this. Welcome, Professor Ochoa. Next on the panel is Professor Veronica Rebreanu. Professor Rebreanu holds the title of Doctor of Law at the Babes-Bolyai University, Cluj-Napoca since 2001, Romania. From 1998 until now, she's been lecturer at the Faculty of Law of Babes-Bolyai University, Cluj-Napoca, and lecturer in subjects theory, general law, special issues of theory of law and environmental law. From 1999 to 2002, she's been a part of the Socrates Erasmus program in Great Britain at the University of Exeter School of Law. In summer of 2004, she wrote the research program, Economic Development and Environment, and how to combine these two vital needs in the transition stage from development to integration. It was funded by the Rotary Organization, and for a program whose scientific coordinator has been appointed. She's also worked as a personal advisor to the Minister of Education and Research. She's been presenting a number of papers in a number of prestigious conferences. She holds many certificates of participation on academic cooperation and competitiveness. And she's from 2013 to 2019, she was the scientific coordinator of the student teams, which had participated in the International Youth Innovation Competition on Global Governance, organized by Fudan University. So welcome, Professor Rebreanu. And lastly, we have Professor Bharat Desai. Professor Bharat Desai holds a chair at JNU, that is the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is a professor. He's been my professor as well, a friend and a colleague in international environmental law. And he's a professor of international law and chairman of the Center for International Legal Studies in the School of International Studies of the JNU, New Delhi. He serves as the editor-in-chief of the Yearbook of International Environmental Law, OUP, United Kingdom, and chairman of the Center for Advanced Study on Courts and Tribunals in India. Professor Desai has contributed tremendously, and his books are pretty popular amongst the students. His significant books include International Environment Court, a legal study of an ideal. This was published by Boston Brillnioff 2018. International Environmental Governance and Multilateral Environmental Agreements, Legal Status of Secretariats, Institutionalizing International Environmental Law. He's mooted a proposal for much earlier, for the United Nations Environment Protection Organization, as well as the revival of the UN Trusteeship Council with the new mandate for environment and global commons. In invited talk way back in 1999, January, at the legal department of the World Bank. And these have been published in important research papers in a number of journals all across. Professor Desai has been consulted by the various ministries within India, Union Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry of External Affairs, and he's initiated and coordinated a number of interdisciplinary and inter-university consortiums, especially on the themes of Himalayan cryosphere, atmospheric aerosols, and geospatial information systems as unique knowledge platforms to generate futuristic cutting-edge knowledge in the respective fields. So Professor Desai, welcome. So having given you a little bit about all of you, I welcome you all once again. And I would like to take the discussion forward by posing the very first question which came to mind within the context which it might be fruitful to have this discussion, which places the importance of global environmental studies and the content with a focus on normative, analytical, experiential, and hermeneutical immersive learning. So I'm going to kick off with the first question for the entire panel, and you may take it from the order in which I spoke. So the first thing which I'd like that you could address would be the evolution in environmental epistemology. It basically started from the era of exploitation, then to conservation and preservation era, and finally to the ecocentric era, which is now being spoken of restoration. Has this change occurred organically out of the concern for the environment, or have we been compelled, forced to make them based upon the anthropocentric requirements in the face of the environmental adversities? Yes. Professor Koivurova.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you very much, and greetings from Finland, and greetings from the Lapland, from the Arctic Circle, so from the other side of the world. So I would first of all say that we haven't reached the ecocentric era of restoration. I think that we have to be kind of realistic as to where we are at the moment. We do not, in more broad terms, we do not kind of see the nature having an intrinsic value in most contexts. So irrespective of what human beings think of it. So I think that that's, for me, as a kind of general statement, is the kind of starting point. If we look at the way our society still work, it's very much on the basis of measuring GDPs and for instance, if we see the reactions to the financial crisis of 2008 or the current pandemic, which were kind of urgent crises, we also understand that we as a society and as a humanity, we can react very swiftly to these kind of urgent issues, but then we have severe problems when we are really confronting these long-term issues, climate change, etc. And I would say that also it is very much on the basis of these anthropocentric requirements. So we can tackle those environmental problems where we can clearly show what are the harmful consequences to human beings. And one kind of a successful example that we normally take up here is of course how we have tackled the ozone layer depletion. So with the Montreal Protocol. So yes, that would be my first take.
Thank you. Thank you, Timo. May I come to you, Christiana?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to say thank you to Jindal for organizing this really great panel. I'm really excited for the conversation, and I really appreciate Charu, your work in facilitating our gathering. So thank you so much. So I actually think this is a wonderful place to start the conversation because it lets us situate the conversation within the dialogue that's actually been going on for a very long time. So whether we look to what we know about environmental history, or whether we look to the roots of a turn toward, and I agree that we're not yet in an ecocentric way of thinking about the environment, but we're certainly turning toward that, or at least we can optimistically hope that we are turning toward that. I think it's important to take a sense of where those roots have come, where we're getting the energy for that turn. And so whether we look to cultures that have never changed away from that ecocentric view of the environment, which we know from, which those of us in the Western world know, thanks to the fabulous work of those communities themselves in highlighting their own epistemic views of the world, and also the work of anthropologists, Bruno Latour, Eduardo Cohn, for example, Nurit Bird-David have done fabulous work in helping us understand better the ways that other systems of epistemology view the world. And it's incredibly important to engage with that literature. It's also true that philosophers have given rise to the work that we are now doing as lawyers, or trying to do as lawyers. So thinking about Richard Sylvan's early work in thinking about the rights of nature and the importance of decentering humans in right hoarding was incredibly important, as was obviously the work of Christopher Stone when he asked whether trees should have standing. And this turn away from our traditional Western epistemic view of the world that is very human-centered and takes as a given that nature is here for the service of our every need is fundamentally crucial to the ways that we need to convert environmental law to be much more capable of dealing with the urgent crises in front of us.
Thank you, Christiana. May I come now to Veronica? Yes. Thank you, Christiana. Am I audible? Yes. So
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. For the very beginning, I would also like to express my thankings and my admiration for the other panelists for their expertise and practical one. And what I would like to underline now is that, in my opinion, these approaches, ecocentric, then anthropocentric, and before these centered to economic aspects, are traced only for several hundred years. But as also Christiana was saying before, trying myself to understand what is happening and why people act the way they do in relating to the environment, and especially with the natural environment, not only the artificial, that the one created by us, by humans, and trying to find some answers. And going back to the writers back in antiquity, I would like to quote Aristotle saying that nature does nothing in vain. So everything has a sense. So every being has its own meaning on this planet. This means we humans, the problem of the humans these days, and for several years, for several hundred years up to now, is that it is like a gap in between the nature and humans. But in fact, we should accept the fact that we are part of nature. We are an element of the nature. And we, as we claim being logic and being rational beings, we should realize the effect of our actions. And more, what is important and what is very interesting, talking about environmental adversities, as nothing does nothing in vain. This means, what about thinking in some other way? These environmental adversities, what if they are result not only of our actions, but also of our thoughts and the way we think and the way we consider nature in report to us. And here there is a lot of literature about this, tracing from the ancient times, and not only, and I'm not talking about only Aristotle now, but around the world. If we are going to read attentively these things, humans have a very important impact on nature. So these days, my opinion is that it's like as if we are discovering again something that that ancient people knew already. If I'm talking about Manu's law, if I'm talking about Native Americans, if I'm going to other traditions, the chthonic traditions which are now discovered, as if they are discovered, but they existed along the years there. So this 2010 Declaration on Rights of the Nature, I think it's a revival of these aspects. And I would like to leave Professor Bharat now to discuss, because what during our discussion, I would like to say that there is a difference, and not explain now, in between the rights of nature, the law of nature, and natural law. And we must not mix them together. Thank you for so far.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Veronica. Yes, the first natural resources class, which happens when I take the class, exactly the same sentence I have said over and over, that there's a difference between rights of nature, natural law, and how you're conceiving nature, whether you're a part of nature or nature is part of you. I think we have forgotten. Let me invite Professor Desai. Professor Desai, your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Charu. And my old student Srijit, he's missing somewhere, and yeah, of course, Timo knows him very well for a long time. Now it's a very, very interesting. I think what we the thing which has been posited. I think maybe I can take you back little. And this is the right time. It's a very momentous time. The 50 years. Okay, the journey of 50 years. We are shortly almost reaching that. In June 2022, the 50 years. Of that Stockholm conference. And I thought this is very pertinent. Since we are talking about this, the predicament issue, what all the colleagues which variously pointed out about, which side, like Veronica mentioned about rights of nature and natural law or whatever, and I thought maybe I thought I got the old original copy of the Limits to Growth, and if you go back to that, what the Club of Rome, projected, what they call as the predicament of mankind, that predicament continues to haunt us even today after 50 years. We have not been able to find that answer. What it called as the world problematic. The problematic remains as it is, for instance. In fact, it has much worsened, over a period of last 50 years, And if you talk about purely what Charu mentioned, the entire trajectory, how we started, like when I, of course, Timo also has got a full length book on everyone, is like, I don't know whether we call ourselves to be in the category of that hallowed category of the musicians or not. All of us, we play our own tunes, so each of us have a take, each of, like it's like, glass looks either half empty or half full, how it looks like, what methodology, what approach you have, like they say, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, how it looks like. And that is exactly what I tried to posit this question, last year, in one of the, even during the worst pandemic period, which was and finally, about some 23 scholars came together, to provide little, what I call is the looking back to look ahead, little, doing a little louder thinking. And I don't know, maybe since Charu probably didn't mention it, this volume came out, just on 5th of June. It's Our Earth Matters, I think the checkbox is visible, that I would have written there, Our Earth Matters, published by iOS Press. This was released, on 5th of June, So plenty of these epistemological questions have been, ranging from Edith Brown Weiss to Nick Robinson to Klaus Boselman to, plenty of scholars which assemble, trying to look at, trying to, peel off the layers, and still we don't have the answer, like how we started from the purely, like if you go back to Rachel Carson's time to Club of Rome report, and how from a purely, even the early conventions like CMS or Ramsar Convention or World Conservation, this Heritage Convention, purely from a conservation agenda, how it has come down to this level where utilitarian requirements have actually driven the entire project, So probably it was not the concern, for the global environment per se, basically trying to adapt, or maybe probably the effort was to co-opt nature or co-opt the entire environment itself, thought that it will be subjected to our needs, and that has really had a boomerang effect, Howsoever the way in which you try to explain, trying to, if that is the case, if you look back, 50 years, like that, as the entire zigzag has become more and more complex, huge plethora, like most of us will not be able to count the number of treaties, multilateral environmental agreements which have been put into effect. As the maze has grown, for instance, the global environment has continued to deteriorate. Why? Something terribly must have gone wrong, or the entire approach, the methodology probably is fundamentally flawed, or probably that there were, I won't use that very harsh word, somebody might, an activist might call it something maybe like, most of the activists like in Glasgow and elsewhere, they will call it dishonesty, that you are not sincere. You don't mean it, probably you are trying to play with it. You're trying to pass time. You think the things will go away, you think, and because hard-headed interest, and what Gandhi actually alluded that. So from the Club of Rome, if you come, that where is the salvation? The entire methodology, law will take case, and law never wanted anything to be banished altogether. What we wanted was to circumscribe, trying to adapt it, trying to make it, as good as possible, which could fit into the human requirement. Prohibition per se has not been there, and each of the issues take, like even the climate convention itself, for instance. Now, on 4th of June next year, it will complete 30 years. It was supposed to be an ad hoc convention. That once the approach is, once the whole thing is over, the convention could be wound up. None of the convention will be wound up. Or take the example about what Timo also mentioned, like the ozone story, for instance, that most of the multinationals, which were really ready with the alternative technology, they themselves came in the market and says, sorry, this is something very terrible. So what I'm trying to indicate is that what has actually driven this entire, whatever the nomenclature, our infatuation with nomenclature, ecological law, environmental law, whatever, conservation law, whatever we call it. But my question will be, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Has it really helped us in making a dent on the global problem? That is the issue which we need to really take a look at.
Very true. Thank you, Professor Desai. And probably, I think all of our answers take stock of the historical context from which we need to learn. The last 50 years and then the centuries before that. So probably there the difference lies. And from that we have to take, as you rightly put it, and as Veronica also rightly puts it, that within the context of global studies, if we are looking for environmental law, comparative global environmental law studies, and especially for the student, probably this citing of history, this lesson in history becomes very, very important for them not to adopt this nomenclature, as Professor Desai is saying, and for them not to just be mixed up and just live within these 50 years of development, of globalization, of the things that we have done wrong. Probably now the time would be to move on beyond that, to look for better solutions on the ground. The community, as I said, the community, the vulnerable communities, the poor communities, and people in the middle, the rich or the poor and the people in the middle, who are facing the maximum brunt of the harm which is being caused due to all the things which are happening at the forefront of whether it's floods, whether it's fires, whether it's, well, the COVID has affected everybody. So I think the youngsters and today's generation, you and I included probably, should be the ones who should be now looking at solutions which will give, which will stay, which will mean something. So probably, I think all of us might be heading towards that kind of a conclusion and that kind of a discussion for the students as well as the other people who are interested. Thank you so much. Let me quickly then take you to the next set of question which came to my mind would be, given the development and the new types of concerns, the new actors, the young actors, and the new standard setting, and the reports, the fact-finding reports, the compliance processes. So international environmental law has emerged, Professor Desai, as a distinct field. It's reflected in its terminology. So how is international environmental law, which was once supposedly not the real international law, what is the nature of this distinctiveness? And will it undermine the fundamental unity and the coherence of law at the international level? And how do the students, from your experience, perceive this, whether international environmental law is a whole new subject which they can pursue and they can be international environmental lawyers, or they still have to learn about the principles within their own domains, compare, and then take it to the international level? Probably there is this fragmentation within international law and international environmental law, and then a student getting ready from a particular jurisdiction who has done environmental law. So we'll start from Professor Desai, and may I request the panelists to confine their answers to 3 minutes this time, because I think it's 7:23 and we have time until 7:45.
Sure. Yeah, well, Charu, I think what you are mentioning, is, I won't call it, well, it's always, it's always, I'm really surprised when a lot of people, because, you catch attention when you coin new word, new phrase, make a splash, that is not the question. That is not the question. Question is, in terms of, I would say, well, international law per se is supposed to provide, we never have had, the time won't permit us to go into that part, international, there was no question of, any time when there was no law per se, no non-leakage is ruled out so far as international law is. Always, for any kind of problems the society faces, international law is supposed, and the basic fundamental principles of international law, they are applicable to all areas, of concern, global concern, and environment issues concerning environment, what we describe, they are part of it. So the fundamental, like the issues of state responsibility, and those things remain the same, So how do we, in a sense, that is exactly where, and I don't, I won't take a very, that kind of a approach. I say I'm teaching. I never do that. I have to, when we, as compared to business law or other laws, we have got to have a humility. When you talk about, natural law, when you want to call, and once you set an example, by example, as a student imbibe it much easily, they relate to it. They understand the gravity of the issues that you really try to really communicate to them. That's, and all that, if I want to describe that in a nutshell, environment means sensitivity. how far you are sensitive. Does it really hurt you? Do you really feel it? Do you really feel the gravity of the impending catastrophe, which affects your daily lives, for instance, And the question is, how will you make a difference? That is what people really want, And whether the particular discipline will be able to provide the answer. So you have to go back to the main discipline of international law itself. All these areas, they are merely offshoots of the parent body itself. And whether the sovereign states will take it seriously, whether international institutions will take it seriously or not, And so there are, what I call it, there is a maze, I think what I call, there is a passing the duck, you are, and there are interests and issues behind it. Like you saw it, like in the Glasgow summit itself, hard-headed, national interest, whatever the commercial interest, and whatever at a particular time, whether the coal, and also it's a very, very practical issue also, because like in a country like India, where almost 1/3 of the people don't have the access to electricity, and you say, well, you phase out coal, but where is the alternative? You say don't take this form of food or something. What do you have to offer to people? Because those needs are genuine. They're disparate. You are talking from a different angle, from people who have never seen darkness or for them even sheer light, and from these sources, howsoever polluted. This is what I will remind what Indira Gandhi said in the Stockholm conference. How can I ask my people not to pollute when their lives are contaminated at the source? So that is where fundamentally issues remain the same. Everybody is concerned, but the question is, you look at it from a different angle. But you need to feel the thing, So that empathy, environment also requires empathy. Whether the writings which all of us carry, does it really carry that empathy? That is most important part, Not making the careers will always be made, good careers will be made, good publication will be made. Does it really make a difference at the end of the day? That will be that need to be our biggest concern.
Great, thank you, Professor Desai. Timo, may I?
Sure. Yes, of course. So obviously, international environmental law has matured into being a discipline of international law. I don't think that there is any, as Bharat already said, that there's no kind of real conflicting trends. It is part and parcel of general international law, and within it, it's fairly distinct. So there are certain types of ways to make laws which are taking the shared interest of the whole humanity. The international civil society participates in making those international treaties, whether it's international environmental NGOs or indigenous peoples or others. And also we have kind of collective kind of procedures for dealing with violations. So we are not kind of trying to guilt trip any state, but we are trying to find solutions how that particular state can return back to compliance, and that way serve the kind of goal of curtailing a certain environmental problem. But I would say that we are also turning kind of gradually away from kind of looking at only kind of international law. I think that in my work, I've been doing a lot of kind of multi-level environmental governance, so trying to look at not only international environmental law, but European environmental law and national environmental law. And obviously that kind of then is kind of, there's a kind of fruitful possibility to compare between regions and between states, comparative environmental law. And also we have this global environmental law as a frame of reference, which is kind of giving new ideas for all of us when we are dealing in our different contexts, in different societies, and to learn from other systems. So I think that should be the kind of way forward. Thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. Christiana?
Yeah, thank you. I do think this is a very important question, because I think that it's incredibly important for our students both to have what we might refer to as the chops of international law, as well as of international environmental law, and also domestic environmental law, so that they can get a range of of the tools that have been used, not just to understand how they might be used in the future, but also to understand their failings, right? We know that over the course of the last 50 years, we have something like a 40-fold, 38, 40-fold increase in the number of environmental laws from that moment till now. And yet during that time, we have also run ourselves into a potential catastrophe. And so we have to appreciate the limits of environmental law, the failures of environmental law, whether that is domestic environmental law or international environmental law. We have failed to regulate the emission of materials that might really endanger life as we know it. And that's a reality. And that requires not just the ability to very competently use the tools that exist, but also to be able to use those tools in incredibly innovative ways. One of the things, if we're looking for exciting possibilities in this moment, I would say that more than at any other moment that I know of historically in law, this is a moment that requires what we might actually welcome to be radical innovations, because using the existing tools in the traditional ways has not resulted in the accomplishments that we require. So it's important to see where it is that environmental law has failed. On the one hand, I agree entirely with Timo, we have had terrific innovations, the ability to integrate civil society in the making of international agreements is 20 years ago, that would have been thought of as really impossible. And now we see that it is very possible. At the same time, while we've got civil society engaged in a very Kantian way in the making of the law that will later govern civil society, that's an incredibly fundamentally important aspect to ensuring that this is a democratic process. At the same time, at the moment that international environmental law is coming into domestic determination, the national determined determinations, and then incorporated into national policy, that's where we see problems, we see breakdowns, both in the ability to ensure that there's sufficient funding, and also in the ability to ensure that domestically there is an integral approach to ensuring that our international commitments are able to be realized on the ground. So what's coming to mind right now is a project that I'm working on right at the moment, but there are others much like it. So in the United States, for example, which is where I am right now, obviously we need to move very quickly toward a renewable energy future. That there is a rapid expansion of wind farms in the United States. At the same time, there's a tremendous amount of resistance to the expansion of those wind farms for reasons that could really understandably evoke sympathy on human rights grounds. And so we need to start to think about how to ensure that receiving communities that are going to be fundamentally changed from rural, intentionally rural environments can begin to see themselves as industrial energy producers as a result of the expansion of wind energy, and what it is that those communities require in order to allow that to happen in their midst. Because currently the compensation structure is not sufficient to allow that to look like anything like justice. So those are some of the problems that we see within international environmental law, domestic environmental law, and the way that that plays out at the very local levels. And that's where some of the challenges, I think, require radical views of how we might be able to shift.
Thank you, Christiana. That was, I think, my sense too. And probably, I'm sure Veronica has her views, and then later on I can add something to this. Veronica.
Yes, almost everything has been told, so I'm going to be very brief on this subject because, but I cannot abstain to refer to that full part of the glass or empty part of the glass, because these international laws, actually, there is an avalanche. During the last 50 years, there is an avalanche of legislation, of international documents referring to environment. But we still have for at least 100 years In the 19th century and before, there were some laws regarding to this. But referring to your question, and what I completely agree with everything was said here. It is as if I was talking about these kind of things. If taken seriously, these regulations, international documents on environment, and especially the principles from the beginning of them, being taken seriously, it might they might be as a glue to any other activity on this planet. And I would like to quote from the water chart in 1967. Somebody who wrote that chart has been very inspired to say that environment has no boundaries. There is no boundaries for environment. So we're talking about international law, but actually it's everyone's. We are on the same planet, everyone. So we cannot lie ourselves in taking from one pocket and putting on the other one. There is a story written by Miguel Angel Asturias in South America about this kind of things. And in the end, if you pay for that, but pollute in the same time, you never know when it comes back, because there are these currents, water currents, air currents. You never know when it's coming back, and even you signed these agreements, you are taking some advantage of such as a Kyoto Protocol, paying because you're polluting. There is no sense. We have to be aware of the fact that any action of our can have an influence over the environment. So I will take these international laws, environmental international laws, rather a glue for any other activity on this earth. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. That's interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with Veronica, what you're saying, and also what Christiana was saying, and Timo did point that out as well. Probably within the classroom setting, suppose it is a set of students who have come from all over the world. Say we are in London, and the students are from South America, from Africa, from Zimbabwe. In fact, today I was going through the Instagram account, and then I found that I think it was the National Geographic or Leonardo DiCaprio's page. He had posted that there was this ranger. Unfortunate event happened, that between the wildlife smugglers and the protectors, that is the park rangers, there have been many incidents where the rangers and the forest officers have been attacked, and these attacks have been brutal. And today itself was this news that one park ranger had died. And this was in the Virunga National Park. Now, that kind of savageness for getting into the park against the law, against the people who are protecting it, that kind of conflict impacts the students quite a bit at times when you bring these examples to class. And what we are saying, this, I'm just trying to put it in context. When Professor Desai was talking about empathy, whether empathy, environmental empathy would bring out change, and whether it begins from the international level, having known the principles, having known the treaties, and then that international laws and principles and treaties getting into the policy, and then in domestic law, after you've signed and ratified it. And yet incidents like this happen, and they're happening consistently. There is where I think the sensitivity towards training, towards raising awareness ought to be, I think, focused. So probably when we're training the lawyers, or when we're talking to the students, I keep on coming back to the classroom setting, which is important probably. So not taking much of the time, it is 7:39. I know we have to finish the session and we could go on for a couple of hours. So I think we will take on 10 more minutes from the other the time that we have, the saving grace that we have. But I have a question. I have a number of questions, of course, but then I think I would like to take up the question which has been sent to me, the audience questions. And one of the questions requires all of your insights. And the question is, with the climate changes, and I quote, with the climate changes and related vulnerabilities that go beyond rising temperatures and melting polar ice caps, this also encompasses the rising threat to the territorial integrity of several nations. And in recent years, handling of migrant crisis, that is the refugee problem, if I'm not mistaken, this person is wanting to talk about, it has not been very hopeful. As per your views, how we as a community preparing for the impending crisis can do about these people? Is it going to be a border security issue? Is it going to be about a global cooperation of protecting environmentally displaced people? So what are your views here? And could you provide some highlights that the international community should learn from this environmental jurisprudence, which is working and which we are talking about, particularly given the increasing climate litigation cases around the world? So it's kind of a mixed question, but we get the gist of it. So I would like to start with Veronica. We'll start with you once.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, it's like a very happy coincidence, because I'm very interested in and I'm questioning myself and my students about this topic, about ecological refugees, and starting with the islands, for instance, because the islands are the first put in danger because of this rise of the level of the sea. And I asked myself several times exactly what the audience said: global cooperation, because on it's a question mark. Because there is enough land on this globe without inhabitants, for instance. But what about taking a population from South Pacific, because they are in danger, and taking them in Russia because Russia is accepting them? Let's see. What about their tradition, their culture, their habits and ways, because they are fishers, their main job is to fish, I guess, and probably be some guides for their islands, but that's no more, or some specific art. What about taking them? Okay, some country or United States, probably they will have enough space to take a whole community. How are the whole the globe, or this global community will help them to adapt to the land, to make new habits and ways, or are they going to be imposed the local laws, because it's lex loci, taking into, I don't know. And more, what about, because some of them are small islands like a small state. What about a whole state is going to be flooded? So is going to be to form an enclave into another country, or is going to be taken as a new population and melting its identity? Very interesting question, and I cannot give a proper answer right now, because it's very tricky. And I hope this to happen, never happen. I hope never happen.
Yes,
yes, thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Christiana?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important question, and I find myself thinking a lot about Professor Desai's imploring us to have empathy. Fundamentally, one of the greatest problems that we have facing this question of environmental ecological refugees is that we lack empathy. We lack the empathy that is required to ensure that their homes are not destroyed by the impending environmental crisis. And then once they are, where they find themselves no longer able to sustain themselves in the ways that they're accustomed to, or because their homes are destroyed, or because their homes no longer exist, we have to have the empathy to open the doors to places where it can still be safe for people to live. Whether that is a question of providing the funding that the contributing countries, the countries that most contributed to the global environmental crisis, actually fulfill their obligations to provide funding to the countries that provided the least impetus to environmental change, or whether that's that the funding comes at the back end once people have actually come to the doors of those developed countries. Either way, it's going to require a tremendous amount of empathy. And this, I think, actually, Charu, comes to one of your other questions, which is about teaching our students. And I do think that fundamentally, it's not just about epistemologies, but about ontology. We have to bring that way of seeing the world that other people have seen before us and need to see again in the future, and incorporate it into our very ontological sense of our engagement with the world and who we are. And that if we can teach that, if we can even make a dent in our ability to teach a shift in people's fundamental ontologies and evoke empathy, we will have really, contributed.
Awesome. Thank you, Christiana. Yeah, totally. I agree. Timo, may I come to you?
Yeah, sure. Very difficult question, I have to admit. So I guess that for both climate refugees and in terms of the inundation of the small island states, those are really vast questions, and obviously there is some kind of academic debate about that, but these are heavy questions, and I would like to address this more in terms of whether we can still do something in terms of kind of curtailing or buying more time for us in terms of kind of trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we did get some kind of good results from the climate Glasgow COP26. We also have this kind of, and I think that here I would also kind of emphasize that where I have some faith in, it's really the kind of younger generations and their kind of perceptions of this planet and how to preserve it. It's different than for instance, for me, an old guy already. So I guess there is some hope, and we have seen this kind of vast movement of these kind of climate petitions around the world, very much basing themselves on these constitutional protections for a healthy environment, drawing on international human rights treaties, also launching some of these in international regional human rights bodies. So I guess that we still have some kind of at least hope that we can stay below 1.5 or at least below 2 degrees warming, and I guess that the more cutting edge kind of issues and very controversial are of course also those related to geoengineering. So that's like just the research is now booming because we are kind of at some kind of interface period where we are thinking whether the political system can deliver, what about these climate petitions, whether we really need to go into these heavy duty geoengineering processes, which are now kind of mainstay in research. They are not mainstay in politics yet, but they may well be. So those would be my kind of takes on this. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Tim. So, Professor Desai.
Well, Charu, I thought I'll put my finger on one of the most contentious issue, which has not come across in our discourse now. Because the genesis or the roots, maybe we need to track it to the entire wide range of conflicts which have been raging around the world, for instance, which have a kind of a direct kind of a effect so far as the I would say making environment as a scourge, the entire earth habitat itself cannot sustain. So there are 5 options, but the time will not permit us to go into that. One is, of course, the entire greed and the quest for, because there are militias and there are insurgent groups and there are those belligerencies which are working, which are trying to have access to resources. Entire African continent, you can see, what has degenerated into what people call it the blood diamonds, for instance, access
Exactly.
to these things, or like, the entire, huge deforestation which is going on, including Amazonia, for instance. That is also another part. Third important facet is the entire culling of wildlife, because that is exactly what fuels the conflicts. So from where does the arms come from? Where does the money come? It's a multi-billion-dollar business, for it. Fourth important component is what was alluded to in this question, in terms of what drives the people. Why should anybody leave their homes and earth? In fact, I ask this question directly, I have often, this Skype talk with Peter Maurer, the president of the International, Committee of the Red Cross, I said, tell me, what do you do? He said, it's unbelievable to see the death and destruction, for instance, that you create condition where people simply leave. And once people leave their homes and earth, they become vulnerable, And you can see the entire human trafficking. And the final part, which is most important part, will be like, how does it, even I would say that, how does this climate change, growing climate related crisis has been exacerbating what is called the sexual and gender-based violence. That people speak in silence, they don't want to talk about that issue. We wrote an article in June, if somebody is interested, on sexual and gender-based role of climate change in exacerbating sexual and gender-based violence, a new challenge for international law. And this has what directly, as soon as came out, was shortlisted, and we got a immediate communication from the president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And this has a directly relation to what the UN Security Council has agenda: women, peace, security. Yes. And you could see during COVID crisis, the sexual and gender-based violence was really exacerbated. And climate change induces the entire issue. And I would urge that the scholars need to go into those areas instead of going to the areas where the grass is green. We should also go to untrodden areas, where these are the hardcore the challenges, whether we like it or not, they are there. And only the scholars need to really engage. At least you need to engage and tell the people, that what it takes, what should matter, what should be done, for instance. At least your community, your students, your colleagues, the entire contribution to the knowledge, I would say the base. And maybe sometime tomorrow, I'm sure the entire churning which is taking place, hopefully might push the different institutional actors, including the United Nations Security Council, United Nations Human Rights Council. Look at the way, like they only recently they announced they gave the call for having new UN Human Rights Council special rapporteur on human rights and climate change. Rights and climate change. Just the last date was over only a few days ago. So that means that once this pushing of the envelope, it will drive the things, those decision makers, to think in those lines. And once you go, because it's a gradual process, something will definitely happen, once you apply mind. And like David Boyd has been looking into that entire part of human rights, as a right itself. So I would say our task will be to do that, think aloud and ahead, ideating process, and to push the envelope, ideas, and that will have I would say at least to go for that huge positivity, because there is no other way out.
Thank you, Professor Desai. Yeah, that makes such a lot of sense. And exactly my next question would have been gender inequality, especially the gender-based violence. I think we're running out of time. Professor Srijit is also here to herd me into the next session. So I would like to thank you immensely for joining, all of you. And the perspectives that we have, we could probably have another session sometime together, and we could talk on these issues and probably get something concrete out of it to be, as you said, pushing the envelope, writing. Probably that could be a very, very interesting thing which could arise out of this engagement that we have had. So I would like to thank all of you, the panelists. Thank you so much. It was a delight to see you all and to meet with you. Professor Desai, especially, again, and Christiana and Veronica and Timo, thank you so much. Professor Srijit, thank you so very much. And thank you for your team. And thank you for all the people in your team who've done this wonderful, wonderful job. And just this is my personal take on, I'll take 10 seconds. And I do remember I wanted to as Professor Desai, I think he's talking today from the heart, and it is the heart which does things at times better than when the core logic of the brain asks you not to or to stop. So we can't solve the problems, right? We can't solve the problems by using similar or same kind of thinking that we had. Problems have been created and they are being added to. New things are coming up, as you rightly pointed out. Gender inequality and gender-based violence within these 2 years, within the COVID times, within India or outside India, we've seen so many instances. But definitely this is the time now to look at new solutions, to push the envelope, as you said, to shift the paradigm and to center it, to make it more inclusive, to be effective. So probably I should end at this note, and thank you all once again. So good night.